Hey friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to press the bell icon like thumbs up, share up right arrow, and subscribe red heart.
What happens back? Hollywood royalty meets Bravo ability and the gloves come off. You won't accept what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits bottom-ward with Andy Cohen for what was declared to be a career-boosting appearance, alone to have it circling into one of the best explosive confrontations in backward night television history. The Duchess' anticipation she could control the narrative, but she had no idea what she was walking into. The tension was apparent from the moment Meghan Markle stepped to simulate the Watch What Happens Alive set. Dressed in an immaculate chrism blazer that probably cost added than best people's monthly rent, she agitated herself with that familiar air of affected confidence that had become her brand since leaving the aristocratic family. But tonight, something acquainted different. Andy Cohen, seated abaft his signature board with that alive beam arena at the corners of his mouth, had acutely done his homework. Welcome back to Watch What Happens Live. I'm Andy Cohen. And tonight we accept the Duchess of Sussex herself, Meghan Markle. Andy announced to the flat audience. His voice carrying aloof the aboriginal bend that seasoned admirers would admit as a warning sign. The acclaim was polite, but not thunderous, and Meghan's smile seemed to bind imperceptibly as she settled into the bedfellow chair. Thank you so abundant for accepting me, Andy. I'm thrilled to be here, Meghan replied, her media-accomplished articulation bland as silk. But those who knew her tells could see the slightest friction in her shoulders. She crossed her legs with practiced elegance, acutely assured the softball questions that had become accepted fare during her anxiously orchestrated media tour. Andy leaned back in his chair, swirling his signature cocktail with deliberate casualness. So, Meghan, let's dive appropriate in. You've been authoritative quite the circuit afresh talking about your new projects, your activity in California, but I have to ask about article that's been on everyone's mind. He paused, letting the blackout amplitude aloof connected abundant to make her uncomfortable. There's been a lot of allocution about your accord with your father, Thomas Markle. He's been pretty articulate in The Columnist lately. The shift in Meghan's address was instantaneous. Her altogether applied smile faltered for a loofer atom of a second afore snapping her back into place, but the accident was done. Andy had struck the aboriginal assumption of the evening, and everyone in the flat could feel it. Well, Andy, as I've said before, family relationships can be complicated, Meghan began, her articulation advancement its measured tone, but with a slight edge creeping in. I anticipate it's important to focus on effective advanced and the positive work we're accomplishing with Archwell rather than abode on abridged narratives. Andy nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he wasn't about to let her pivot so easily. But these aren't just tabloid narratives, are they? Your father has been consistently aggravating to reach out. And from what I understand, he wasn't arrived to your wedding. That seems appealing absolute to me. The studio admirers confused uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the typical celebrity breath allotment they were acclimated to seeing on backward night television. Meghan's jaw anchored about imperceptibly and she leaned advanced slightly, a gesture that anatomy accent experts would later analyze as a resting positioning. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about my ancestors' situation, Meghan replied, her articulation now acclimatized a warning accent that anyone who had followed her acknowledged battles with the British columnist would recognize. My father made choices that put my assurance and the safety of my new ancestors at risk. Working with the tabloids, staging photographs, speaking to reporters afterwards my knowledge or consent. Those aren't the actions of addition who has their daughter's best interests at heart. Andy raised an eyebrow, acutely analysis blood in the water, but has additionally said publicly that he feels you've cut him off completely. He's mentioned wanting to accommodate his grandchildren, your children, with Harry. Doesn't he deserve a adventitious to accomplish amends? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's media training was wearing with her accessible irritation, and the careful mask she'd beat for years was beginning to slip. Her voice, aback she finally spoke, had absent some of its polished smoothness. Andy, I acquisition it interesting that your demography the babble of someone who has a fresh alone my privacy and a wash belief about me to the press over mine. My ancestor had numerous opportunities to handle this situation privately, but he chose the accessible route every distinct time. Her accent was becoming sharper, added clipped. I accept to protect my accouchement from that affectionate of toxicity. The admirers was now absolutely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Andy, however, seemed energized by the advance back. He leaned forward, his announcement a admixture of journalistic affair and barely contained action at accepting cracked through her anxiously constructed facade. I'm not demography anyone's word over anyone else's, Andy replied, his voice demography on that accurate tone. He reserved for celebrities who thought they could ascendancy his show. I'm asking questions that I anticipate the audience wants answered. And speaking of protecting your children, there's been some criticism about how you and Harry have handled your aloofness apropos while simultaneously accomplishing actual public interviews and projects. Some bodies see that as hypocritical. The word hypocritical hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her altogether manicured hands gripped the accoutrements of her chair. And for a moment, her accord cracked completely. The woman who had faced down the British tabloids and emerged victorious in cloister battles was suddenly faced with an adversary she hadn't fully prepared for. An accuser who wasn't intimidated by her appellation or her legal team. That's a absolutely unfair characterization, Meghan attempted back, her voice assent hardly aloft its carefully articulate tone. We've been incredibly careful about a back and how we allotment our story. Aggregate we've done has been about acclimation the record and angry aback adjoin years of lies and racist attacks from the British media. Andy's eyes lit up at the mention of racism, acutely recognizing another access to explore, and I absolutely abutment you're appropriate to fight back adjoin racist coverage. But some critics accept a secular out that you seem to adjure racism accurately aback other criticisms don't stick. Alike Piers Morgan has said, don't, Meghan interrupted, her articulation articulate as a blade. Don't you cartel adduce Piers Morgan to me. That man has been bedeviled with me for years, and his behavior has been borderline stalking. The actuality that you would alike acknowledgement his name in this context shows absolutely what affectionate of interview this absolutely is. The studio had gone asleep silent. This was no longer a celebrity chat. This was a confrontation. And anybody present could feel the electricity crackling between host and guest. Andy's expression had confused from antic to serious, acquainted that he had pushed the appropriate button at absolutely the right moment. Meghan, I'm artlessly allurement about public statements and criticisms that are out there. If you can't handle questions about your accessible persona and the choices you've made, maybe doing interviews isn't the appropriate move, Andy replied, his articulation calm, but with an unmistakable animate underneath. The implication was clear. She had walked into his house, and she would comedy by his rules. Meghan's face flushed slightly, a aggregate of acrimony and embarrassment at actuality so directly challenged on a live television. She had clearly accepted the differential treatment she developed acclimatized to from sympathetic interviewers, not this relentless acid into the contradictions and controversies that surrounded her accessible image. I can handle questions aloof fine, Andy, Meghan replied, her articulation bound with barely controlled anger. What I can't handle is the connected constancy of false narratives and hit pieces bearded as journalism. I came actuality tonight thinking this would be a admiring conversation about my assignment and my projects, not another befalling for you to accumulation on with the aforementioned annoyed talking credibility that have been acclimated adjoin me for years. Andy sat bottomward his cocktail and looked directly at her, his announcement now completely serious. This is respectful conversation, Meghan. These are legitimate questions about your public statements and actions. If you acquisition them uncomfortable, maybe that says something about the positions you've taken rather than the questions I'm asking. The commercial breach that followed acquainted like the calm afore a hurricane. During the brief intermission, Meghan could be seen adjusting her blazer with sharp, agitated movements while Andy conferred quietly with his producers. Aback the cameras formed again, the atmosphere in the flat had somehow developed alike more charged. Welcome aback to watch what happens live. Andy appear his voice carrying a alarming association that regular admirers knew meant edition was about to get eviscerated. We're here with Meghan Markle and we were just discussing some of the accessible criticism surrounding her media strategy. He turned to face her anon and the smile on his face was annihilation but friendly. Now, Meghan, I appetite to talk about article that's been aggravation a lot of people. You and Harry did that massive Oprah account area. You made some appealing austere allegations about the aristocratic family. But back then, several of your claims except been, let's say, questioned. Meghan's absolute body tensed. This was the minefield she had hoped to avoid, but Andy was walking straight into it with the aplomb of someone who had done his analysis and wasn't abashed to use it. I angle by everything we said in that interview, Meghan replied, her articulation ice cold. Every distinct babble was the truth. And frankly, I'm annoyed of accepting to defend our lived acquaintance to bodies who weren't there and accept no abstraction what we went through. Andy leaned back, clearly relishing the moment. But that's just it, Meghan. Some of your lived experience doesn't assume to bout up with documented facts. For instance, you claimed you and Harry were affiliated 3 canicule afore the royal bells in a clandestine ceremony, but the Archbishop of Canterbury himself later antiseptic that what you had was a private barter of vows, not a legal marriage. That's a appealing significant distinction. The blush drained from Meghan's face. She had acutely not expected Andy to dive this abysmal into the specifics, and her media training hadn't prepared her for addition who would fact-check her claims in absolute time on live television. That's semantics, she shot back. But her articulation lacked its earlier conviction. The important affair was the spiritual and affecting charge we made to anniversary other. The acknowledged ceremony was aloof for the public. Semantics. Andy's eyebrows attempt up. Meghan, you literally told Oprah that you got married 3 canicule before. Those were your exact words. And aback the Arch of the Church of England has to publicly correct your statement. That's not semantics. That's a absolute absurdity at best and at worst. He let the sentence hang in the air. At worst, what? Meghan snapped, her accord assuredly beginning to able in earnest. What absolutely are you implying, Andy? The flat audience was now absolutely riveted. This had gone far aloft archetypal celebrity gossip and had entered the branch of journalistic confrontation. Andy's expression was serious, almost prosecutorial. I'm not implying anything, Meghan. I'm advertence facts. And the actuality is you fabricated claims in that interview that were demonstrably false. The timeline you gave about back you supposedly had your authorization and keys taken abroad doesn't bout with documented royal engagements you attended. Your claim about not alive annihilation about Harry or the aristocratic ancestors afore you met is contradicted by your own amusing media posts and interviews area you talked about Princess Diana and the royal wedding. Anniversary point hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her anxiously constructed narrative was actuality dismantled allotment by piece on a live television, and she was clearly disturbing to advance her composure. You're cherry-picking details and demography things out of context, she protested. But her articulation was now shaking with almost controlled rage. You're doing absolutely what the British tabloids did, age my words and blank the bigger account of institutional racism and the brainy bloom crisis I was going through. Andy's announcement didn't soften. If anything, he seemed to sense weakness and apprenticed harder. I'm not twisting anything, Meghan. I'm quoting you directly. And speaking of mental health, you claimed in that interview that you were denied advice aback you reached out, but assorted royal correspondence accept aback appear that the Alcatha has an all-encompassing support system for ancestors members, including mental bloom resources. Are you saying that absolute arrangement was kept abstruse from you specifically? The catechism was devastating in its precision. Meghan's face had gone from anemic to flushed, and her easily were visibly trembling. She was acutely out of her depth, adverse an interviewer who had done his homework and wasn't abashed by her victim narrative. Those aristocratic correspondents are mouthpieces for the institution, she replied, her articulation rising. Of course, their activity to avert the system. You accept no abstraction what it was like to be trapped in that situation, to have your every move monitored and controlled. But you weren't trapped, were you? Andy attempt back. You left. You fabricated the best to footfall aback from royal duties and moved to California. You had bureau throughout this entire situation. Yet, you abide to present yourself as a victim with no options. The Babel victim seemed to trigger something age-old in Meghan. Her eyes flashed with 18-carat anger, and for the first time all evening, Her media training absolutely alone her. "How dare you," she hissed. "How cartel you sit there and abbreviate what I went through? You accept no abstraction what it's like to have an absolute academy about face join you. To accept the columnist address lies about you every distinct day, to abhorrence for your safety and the assurance of your unborn child." Andy remained blah by her emotional outburst. "I don't minimize anything, Meghan. But I additionally don't think being asked accepted questions about inconsistencies in your public statements constitutes an attack. You've built a media authority on your royal experience and your grievances against the institution. If your activity to profit from that story, you should expect it to be scrutinized." The word profit was like a red banderole to a bull. Meghan's face angled with acerbity and she leaned advanced aggressively in her chair. "Profit," she spat. "We've used our belvedere to highlight important causes and accord articulation to the voiceless. Everything we've done has been about service and authoritative absolute a pulse on the world." Andy's beam was abbreviate and humorless. "Service? Meghan, you active a $100 actor accord with Netflix. You have podcast deals, book deals, speaking engagements that command six-figure fees. Your account has fabricated you incredibly wealthy. Let's not pretend this is all altruistic." The flat had gone asleep bashful again. But this time, the activity was different. The admirers could faculty that something fundamental had shifted, that this confrontation had accomplished a point of no return. Meghan's face was now ablaze red with acerbity and humiliation. "Our success doesn't abate our charge to service," she replied through gritted teeth. "And frankly, I acquisition it interesting that a man who congenital his career on account and celebrity ball is lecturing me about actuality and public service." It was a low blow, and everyone in the allowance knew it. Andy's expression blurred considerably, and his articulation took on an accent that his regular guests knew meant they had crossed a line. "At Atomic I'm honest about what I do, Meghan. I don't pretend to be extenuative the apple while cashing checks and clearing array with my family on all-embracing television. I don't affirmation to appetite aloofness while doing tell-all interviews and absoluteness shows." The restriction in the flat was suffocating as Andy and Meghan stared each added bottomward beyond the desk. The audience sat in abashed silence, witnessing what would assuredly go down as one of the best explosive celebrity interviews in television history. "You apperceive what, Meghan?" Andy said, his articulation bottomward to a dangerously quiet level. "Aback we're being honest here, let's allocution about the real albatross in the room. Your pattern of a fire bridges with anybody who doesn't accord you absolutely what you want." Meghan's eyes widened in shock and fury. "Excuse me? Your father, your half-sister, your aloft friends, the aristocratic family, former agents associates who've all spoken out about alive with you. At what point do you attending in the mirror and ask yourself if maybe you're the common denominator in all these fractured relationships?" The catechism hit like a nuclear bomb. Meghan's aperture fell open, and aback she assuredly began her voice, it was afraid with rage. "How cartel you suggest that I'm amenable for other people's betrayals? These bodies awash me out for money and fame. They couldn't handle my success." Andy leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "Or maybe they couldn't handle your behavior. Your aloft best friend, Jessica Moyuni, your father, palace staff. They all acquaint the same story about addition who demands absolute loyalty but gives none in return. That's complete nonsense." Meghan attempted back, but her articulation cracked. "My ancestor chose the tabloids over his own daughter. The palace agents leaked belief about me to protect added associates of the family." "Did they?" Andy challenged. "Or did they finally get annoyed of actuality abhorrent for everything while you played the victim? Because from area I'm sitting, it looks like you've angry victimhood into a brand, and anyone who questions that narrative gets befuddled beneath the bus." Meghan's easily were clenched into fists. She was acutely disturbing to maintain any affinity of composure. "I will not sit actuality and let you psychoanalyze me based on abridged gossip," she hissed. "You don't apperceive me and you certainly don't apperceive what I've been through." Andy's smile was razor sharp. "But I do know what you've said about and your version of contest keeps changing. In the Oprah interview, you claimed you never Googled Harry or the aristocratic family, but years earlier, You were quaint about watching William and Kate's wedding. Which version is true, Meghan? The direct confrontation with her contradictions was devastating. Meghan's carefully constructed bluff was crumbling in real time. Those are absolutely different contexts, she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. I may accept being aware of aloft aristocratic events, but I didn't research Harry specifically. But that's not what you said. Andy pressed relentlessly. You corrected yourself as this above-board American who stumbled into royal activity absolutely unprepared. But your own amusing media history contradicts that absolute narrative. Meghan was now visibly afraid with acerbity and humiliation. You're agey everything. You're demography things out of ambience and building a anecdotal that fits your agenda. My agenda? Andy laughed bitterly. Meghan, I'm application your own words. If your anecdotal doesn't authority up to basal scrutiny, that's not my problem. That's yours. The breaking point had arrived. Meghan aback stood up from her chair. Her movement so abrupt that it abashed anybody in the studio. I don't accept to sit actuality and listen to this appearance assassination, she declared, her articulation shaking. This isn't journalism. This is a hit job, and I debris to participate in it. Andy remained seated, attractive up at her with mock concern. Meghan, sit down. If you can't handle accepting your public statements questioned, maybe you shouldn't accomplish them in the Aboriginal place. Don't you cartel acquaint me to sit down. Meghan snapped, her accord completely gone. I came actuality in acceptable acceptance and instead you've spent the absolute time attacking me with lies and distortions. I've spent the absolute time allurement you about things you've said publicly, Andy replied calmly. If you accede that an attack, what does that say about the things you've said? The catechism was the final straw. Meghan's face contorted with acerbity and she took a footfall against the desk. You apperceive what this is really about, she shouted. This is about a bitter man who makes his active tearing down acknowledged women. You can't stand that I congenital article elusive while you're still sitting abaft this desk gossiping. Andy's announcement darkened, but he leaned aback with a algid smile. At least I'm honest about what I do, Meghan. And at atomic aback I leave this studio tonight, I won't accept to explain to my publicist why I aloof had a complete meltdown on a live television. The words were like a bang in the face. Meghan seemed to aback apprehend that she was having a breakdown while millions of people watched. This account is over, she said finally, her voice barely aloft a whisper, but abounding with venom. I will not be subjected to this kind of treatment. She angry and began walking against the exit, her movements sharp and aggressive. But Andy wasn't finished. Running abroad again, Meghan? He alleged afterwards her. Just like you ran from the aristocratic ancestors aback things got tough. Aloof like you run from every situation area you don't get to control the narrative. Meghan chock-full asleep in her tracks. For a moment, it looked like she might about face around, but instead she kept walking, her amateur adamant with fury. Give my commendations to Harry, Andy added as she accomplished the door. I'm abiding he'll be captivated to see how this went. Meghan paused at the door, her duke on the handle. The cameras bent her face and profile and the announcement of authentic rage and defeat was unmistakable. Then she yanked the aperture accessible and disappeared into the hallway. Andy turned aback to the cameras, his expression a admixture of achievement and disbelief. The admirers sat in complete silence. Well, Andy said finally, straightening his tie. I assumption that's one way to end an interview. The most explosive celebrity account in recent memory was over, catastrophe with a dramatic exit that would be replayed for years to come. Meghan Markle had absolved into Andy Cohen's area cerebration she could control the conversation, alone to discover that some narratives can't be managed, and some interviewers refused to be charmed into submission. The Duchess had assuredly met her match, and the absolute apple had watched her crumble under pressure. The account that was supposed to adjust her public persona had instead become the defining moment that apparent the contradictions her critics had connected suspected. This was an action that Meghan Markle had not only lost but absent spectacularly and on the biggest date possible.
Thank you for watching my video.